Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Greg, I was actually thinking, running this past you, would you be interested in talking a bit about exactly how RChain is the preferred solution for a proof of stake model that can scale without harnessing the entire power of the sun, as you've mentioned in the past?
Well, I don't think I've said harnessing the entire power of the sun. What I think is that if you take the proof of work networks up to scale, then if it grows even linearly in the amount of heat and energy that it costs, then you'll find that it melts the planet, right? To get even the 3 orders of magnitude necessary to get up to visa level speeds, and that's only one network, right? There's lots of networks besides visa, but to get up to visa level speed, you're talking 3 orders of magnitude. 3 orders of magnitude, so that's 10 to the third increase in throughput, which is gonna, if it's roughly linear, then you're talking 10 to the third increase in the use of energy and the use of and the corresponding heat dissipation. So yes, that will absolutely melt the planet. So it's never going to, without basically re-engineering it to the point that it no longer looks like proof of work. That solution is not scalable. It's a great solution from the point of view of pedagogy. You can kind of explain it. People can see that it works and that sort of thing. But beyond that, it's not such a good solution. And the example I like to use in the industry is nobody is using HTTP 1.0 currently, and they certainly don't use HTTP for downloading videos. HTTP 1.0 for downloading videos and other kinds of things. So HTTP 1.0 was great for demonstrating to people some of the potential of the World Wide Web, but it wasn't really good from the point of view of secure or scalable engineering. And the same is true here. Bitcoin has a role, an educational role, but it's not the ultimate solution. The proof of stake is an alternative solution which has a dramatically different energy characteristic. We're already seeing 2 orders of magnitude improvement in a single shard on RChain with toy hardware. And we can easily take it to 3 orders of magnitude with we haven't even begun to tweak or optimize the network, and that doesn't include the sharding, which will get us as much scaling as we want, because we can push things in separate computations into different shards, which is the way that most of the financial transactions work in the world today. Anyway, a huge number of these networks are separate. Rather than running it within a single network, and that's how things scale. So already you can see just from basic back of the envelope calculations that it provides a realistic solution to the problem of scaling without the same profile with respect to energy consumption and therefore heat distribution. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's crazy. Like the way I think of things at this moment, if we were to kind of take a snapshot of where we are right now in the whole world of crypto, we have this situation where Bitcoin is gone through a crypto winter, and now it's kind of in a what could be called a crypto doldrums, and everyone's just kind of waiting to see where the next step is going to go. Meanwhile, there's like major banks in the world, announcing their own cryptos, and major social networks in the world announcing their own cryptos, but no one has kind of been able to establish that HTML2 yet. So we're just kind of like stuck right now, and until someone kind of comes out with a solution, ideally us.
Totally.
I also want to mention, sorry, Laura, just to point out that we say Bitcoin, but we have to remember that there are hundreds of copies of the Bitcoin protocol, including Ethereum, right? Ethereum, the current Ethereum network is a proof of work network.
Yeah.
So when we're really talking about proof of work as a protocol, and that just doesn't doesn't scale. And anyone who's done anything with these networks knows that it doesn't scale. It's just not a good engineering solution for using these networks to do much of anything except a few payments per second. But the promise, the aim is to provide this decentralized network that not only does payments but does significant data asset distribution, right? And if you look at the way the world is coordinating itself these days, whether you're talking about the social networks like Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or Twitter, or you're talking about the dissemination of music, the world is coordinating itself using the movement of digital assets, right? And so data is the most important feature of these digital networks by far.
Yeah.
And so we have to build networks that can handle data and not just payments. So that's the necessity for scaling, right? It's not just getting a few a few million more transactions per second, right? What you're interested in is being able to push data around in a way that there is not necessarily a trusted source for the data, right? So you don't have to trust Google, you don't have to trust Facebook, you don't have to trust Instagram or the U.S. government, right? The entire community, anyone who runs a server, can participate in the movement of the data assets. That's a much better world, and if we can do that without melting the planet, that's an even better world.
Yeah, it's almost like we have, of course, our incentives to solve the proof of work model for scalability, to make smart contracts work, basically. But now we have perhaps a more important reason to move away from proof of work, and that's its role in global warming. And there's this article that I dredged up. It's actually about a year old, but I think it kind of explains things well. And the basically it's how expanding Bitcoin use will push global warming above 2 degrees Celsius in 2 decades, finds a study. So there's a study that was done in University of Hawaii, that basically kind of examines the problem in more detail. And if I could just kind of read a little bit of it here. The ascent of Bitcoin could boost global warming to 2 degrees in just 2 decades, according to a new analysis. In a new study that examined the entire chain of events that leads to the creation of Bitcoins, researchers at University of Hawaii examined how the projected growth of this cryptocurrency would harm the climate. By way of comparison, the scientists compiled data on the uptake of 40 different technologies, ranging from dishwashers and ebooks to electric power and the internet. They used this information to estimate the rate of uptake this cryptocurrency would see in coming years. Based on their most conservative appraisal, the team found that the cumulative emissions from Bitcoin would be enough to push global warming beyond 2 degrees in 22 years. If the average rate of technology uptake is used instead, this number is closer to 16 years. Clearly, any further development of cryptocurrencies should critically aim to reduce electricity demand if the potentially devastating consequences of 2 degrees of global warming are to be avoided, said Professor Camilo Mora, who led the study. Currently, the emissions from transportation, housing, and food are considered the main contributors to ongoing climate change, said Katie Talladay, a master's student and co-author of the paper. This research indicates that Bitcoin should be added to this list. Clearly, any further development of cryptocurrencies should critically aim to reduce electricity demand if the potentially devastating consequences of 2 degrees of global warming are to be avoided. So that's, I think that's just like a really well laid out kind of explanation that we have to solve proof of work.
Yeah, and I really like that those estimations, they explain that they're on the conservative side as well, and we already know that the use of cryptocurrencies is already, it's not where it's going to be, obviously, in the next few years. And, Daryl, you and I have talked to people, who say, oh, well, my project isn't using that much, energy. And, but that's kind of like betting against your own project, like if you really want your project to do well, then you want millions of people to be using it. You know what I mean? And it's just like any other environmental crisis, like, well, I'm just one car on the road, or, I just use, one plastic bottle a day, or, you know what I mean? Like, you have to really see your place in the entire situation. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's a great article. And like, if you could link to it in the chat, I think that would be really good for people to see that. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? I know that Daryl has a bunch of other research to talk about today, which I think could be really good, but I was just wondering what anybody else has to say about this. Possibly nothing. Okay, well, that's fine. Okay, well, great. Maybe the people who listen to this will think it's fascinating. I just find it to be an extremely urgent concern, because when I first was invited to be part of our chain, I was really unaware of how much energy Bitcoin and the similar projects were using, and as I've learned a lot more about what's going on, I just think it's extremely urgent. So anyway, I'm glad that we're including that in this conversation. Daryl, thank you for finding that extremely useful piece of information from the Independent.
No, I just want to echo your concerns. I mean, when I got into the cryptocurrency space, I came to it from trying to build a decentralized social network, and we were looking for a decentralized microtransaction solution. We started looking at the cryptocurrencies as an approach, and the issue has, for me, was evident almost immediately. And you can ask Ed Eichholz. I was talking to him about it and said, look, proof of work is not a reasonable solution, because it first of all, it doesn't scale, but second of all, even if you did scale it, it will be a climate disaster. And so I began pushing for an alternative protocol from the very beginning. It's not reasonable to try to make this be the protocol. And the Bitcoin maximalists, they really have to start thinking about, a different solution, even if they need to call it Bitcoin, right? We cannot accept this kind of technology as a solution, because it's, you know, it can push us to a tipping point much faster than we're currently headed in that direction. So yeah, I agree with you 100%, Nora. We must change the protocol if we're going to be responsible about using cryptocurrency as a coordination mechanism in addressing climate. That's absolutely crystal clear.
Well, and I just also think that, you know, sometimes we forget that a lot of people who we might want to collaborate with or, you know, otherwise work with in the future might not be crypto experts, and they might not necessarily know that proof of stake is different than proof of work right away, you know, and they might not realize that what we're building is so much better than, you know, what used to exist, or what still exists, but they might not realize that we're building a superior model. And so I just think it would be important for us to differentiate between these two things in terms of how much energy is being used. Like, I've had people come up to me and be like, well, do you know, Nora, that blockchain uses so much energy? And I'm like, well, it's a little more complicated than that, you know? So I just think our chain could also differentiate itself in terms of being an energy, you know, leader in this way, you know, to those who are not as well versed in, you know, what's actually happening. Just an idea. But anyway, Daryl, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the research that you found for this week, the news that is happening, because every week now there's so much going on. I mean, like last week, I think there were 5 or 6 different climate disasters, but I don't know if we're going to talk about those today.
Yeah, so I was actually wanting to start the whole thing off with just a little bit of just climate news about what's been going on this week. One thing you probably have seen is that September was the hottest month on record. Time magazine this September hit the record for the hottest ever, and 2019 is shaping up to be the second hottest year. Scientists say the globe sizzled to a record-tying hot month in September, driven partly by a sweaty United States. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says 2019 tied with 2015 for the hottest September on record globally. September averaged 60.71 degrees, 1.71 degrees higher than the 20th century average. Temperatures on land were the hottest on record for September, with records going back to 1880. NOAA calculates that the Earth is on pace for the second hottest year on record, behind 2016, a mere 3 years ago. NOAA climate monitoring chief Deke Arnold says all but the western third of the United States was record or near record hot in the month. Arndt says this is warming that's been going on for decades from heat trapping gases from the burning of fossil fuels. So just, yet another week, yet another record. Another article I thought was, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. Qatar, now so hot, it has started air conditioning the outdoors. Giant coolers in public areas accelerating climate crisis further by using electricity from fossil fuels. Temperatures in Qatar, one of the hottest places on Earth, have risen so much that authorities have installed air conditioning in the open air, including in streets and outdoor markets. The country, where summer temperatures now reach up to 46 degrees Celsius, has already started air conditioning its football stadiums in preparation for November's World Cup, itself delayed because of the extreme heat. Giant coolers have also been installed along pavements and even in outdoor shopping malls, so a cool breeze allows life to go on as before. But the outdoor air conditioning is part of an accelerating vicious cycle, as the electricity that powers them is from fossil fuels, which emit even more of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that is causing the climate emergency. Qatar, which is the largest per capita emitter country of greenhouse gases, according to the World Bank, nearly 3 times as much as America and almost 6 times as much as China, uses about 60% of its energy as electricity for cooling. So I don't know if you guys noticed that article this week, but that's pretty insane.
That's crazy. I'm really surprised that they don't do outdoor air conditioning with like solar panels or wind or something that is more efficient, because with the fossil fuels, I mean, sorry, you're right, it is actually really funny, but but don't they lose an enormous amount of waste electricity to heat? Right? Like at a coal power plant or whatever they're using to power all this, don't they lose a lot of the energy to heat? Isn't that the big problem? So aren't they just heating up other places more? Like,
well, they're contributing to the heating up of the planet because they're burning fossil fuels to cool
right, but I mean,
themselves.
Yeah, I just okay. Wow,
but you have countries near it, like Saudi Arabia, who have been installing the largest solar panel farm in the world, and there's ways out of this, but really, like, what has to happen at some point, and this is something that we're confronting up here in Canada. We're actually going through an election. I don't know if you guys know, on Monday we have a federal election. So we're choosing our next prime minister, and it looks like the Russians are doing their dirty work, and the Conservatives are basically in a dead heat with what would be considered our Democratic Party, the Liberals. Fortunately, we have 5 other parties in the running, and most of them are left of center as far as the global warming solution is. But even our Conservative Party here in Canada is acceptant of the science of global warming. So it's a major issue here. It's a major election issue here. But Canada has a kind of a bad image because we have the oil sands, which is the dirtiest way to get oil. And one of our provinces rely almost entirely on it for its economy, and it wields a lot of power here politically in Canada. So it's a big problem. It's something that even Justin Trudeau, who has basically adopted the Green Party's policy for climate change, he still can't let go of the pipeline that's wanting to be built. So it's because it's Alberta wields so much power. So it's a tricky tightrope walk here in Canada. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after Monday.
Yes, and David Attenborough has called, and others are calling 2020 a super year. I'm not sure if people have heard this, but which I really think is an interesting term. But politically, environmentally, technologically, I think a lot of people, who have worked and will be involved with our chain can agree with this. And just a lot of socially, economically, just there's so many different movements going on around the world that kind of are at the turning point in 2020. And I was watching a video by David Attenborough just the other day, and he was talking about how 2020 is coming up, and there's just a chance for things to go kind of one way or the other. And your election up in Canada is one example of that. And there are so many upcoming elections around the world. There are elections in South America, obviously in the United States. There's a lot that is coming up, and I think it's a very exciting time, but we have to really focus and coordinate. That's the coordinate part of the climate and coordinate talk that we're having if we really want to make the next year what we believe it can be. And of course, it's going to not be the easiest thing to do, because another piece of news, if I can just dovetail onto what you said, Daryl, I'm sure that you saw, they've just announced where the G7 is going to be, and that's a big mess. But they've also just announced that they're not going to even discuss climate change there at all. So maybe there's going to be some kind of effort to force them to discuss climate change, you know? So we have some work to do. We need to coordinate very quickly. So
yeah, something tells me that'll change by then. Even in the last month, it's been interesting because last week as well, in your country, you had, I believe, was it the last Democratic debate? Or maybe not. No, it won't be the last one. But anyway.
I'm sure there'll be another. There's always another.
but I guess CNN hosted it, and there was a lot of pushback afterwards because there were no questions about climate change.
Right. Exactly.
And
they
it
had time
seems
to ask
like
about Ellen and other things. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like even in the last month, it's become a really important issue to discuss within that primary race. And you had Steyer, is that his name? Steyer or Steyer? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, Tom Steyer.
Tom Steyer.
Yeah, the billionaire running for president, who's also a big climate activist. And he also was one of the people that began the effort, well, sort of the social effort to impeach Donald Trump, even though he doesn't have any political power.
Right. And so he came out saying that climate change is the most important international problem we're facing. So, you know, there's some bold statements being made that I think, you know, are a reflection of how things are changing rapidly.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that just back of the envelope calculations, if you look at the speed at which governments are able to respond to the issue, I mean, the issue has been red hot for years, and there's been almost no reasonable response. And so I think that, and then on top of that, the speed at which things are happening, there's another issue, which is that these issues cross jurisdictions. You know, it's one thing to, you know, have China or India plant a bunch of trees, and I agree that that's an important part of the solution. But you know, one tree does not equal another tree. And if you destroy the Amazon, for example, there's not going to be the same. You're not going to get the same kind of climate impact by planting a bunch of deciduous trees in the northern hemisphere to take up for that. So there needs to be global coordination with respect to the response, and global coordination cuts across all the jurisdictions. And so we don't have an infrastructure that matches the problem, and that's why I think that technologies like blockchain and other things are absolutely necessary at this point. We have to be able to get people to work together side by side, despite the fact that they're living, you know, on opposite sides of the U.S.-Canada border, or they're living on opposite sides of the, you know, India, China border, or anything like that, right? And this is the thing that we're facing is much larger than the infrastructure that we've built to deal with problems. Nation states are not going to cut it now.
Yeah, I think that, to me, the solution isn't to attempt to, I mean, isn't to attempt to sidestep or bypass government. For me, I think the solution, and maybe it's because I'm a Canadian, I think the solution is more to really work at improving government. I think, the old misquoted adage from Ronald Reagan, government is the problem, has carried politics in the United States to such a degree that now you have a president who is installing people who are hostile to the committees and departments that they are in charge of. And I don't think that that's the solution. I think the solution is to help find solutions for governments to be more transparent and more democratic, and to make quick decisions and the right decisions. I think that with all its flaws, the United Nations is an important institution, and so I think that the solution is going to come from learning how we can coordinate nations better and coordinate ourselves within nations to make the governments run better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting that we have to throw away the existing infrastructure. I just don't think that it's up to speed. Up to
yeah.
My sense is that we cannot wait.
Yeah.
We can't wait for them to get it right, and instead we have to take the bull by the horns ourselves. Part of that is trying to influence people who are in positions of distributing resources, or affecting policy that distributes resources. But part of that is just doing things ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the same kind of attitude that you have in a whistleblower. A whistleblower comes forward and says, "Hey, there's abuse of power here, or there's a misuse of funds, or whatever it is." When they come forward, they're taking personal responsibility, and I just don't think it's appropriate or reasonable to wait for the governments to get it right. And I think and most of the problems that we're going to be dealing with cut across jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the blockchain technology, there isn't a regulatory framework that deals with how it works, because it also works across jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah, I think we're going to witness a complete transformation of what government is and what it means for people in the next decade. It's going to be a complete rapid shift. It has to. I mean, that's the thing that I love about Greta's speech. The first one that she gave is that she was basically saying, "I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm not here to kind of fight against what you are. I'm just telling you to get out of the way, because here we come." And I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to see a massive shift in what even government means for people.
I agree with that. And without tools like blockchain, it can get really ugly, right?
Yeah,
we've already seen sort of internet mob justice, and that's not a world that I particularly want to support, right? I'd much rather have some notion of rule of law, but the issue is, which law?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's why I loved one of the app projects that was being written for our chain, that Truth DApp. We need to restructure the whole foundation of social networks right now, built on surveillance capitalism, profiting off of the lowest common denominator of humanity, fear and division. We need to solve that problem.
Yeah, understood. I agree. And they're this, to me, it's not all about just sort of radical uh, uh, you know radical dialogue. It's not rhetoric,
Yeah.
right? They're very practical things that can be done. Our chain is doing the first practical step, which is to create a coordination technology that actually is scalable and doesn't have the same kind of climate impact. But just because you have the bits laid out, I mean, we've had an amazing telecommunications advances in telecommunications technologies in the last 30 years, right? Just unprecedented advances in telecommunication technology. And just because the infrastructure is laid in doesn't mean that we're treating each other any better.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so there,
it's like our chain's building the foundation correctly by construction, and but what's the house going to look like? What is it that we're what's the foundation that we're building for? And that to me is the key. Like one thing I always go for guidance is that that part of Lawrence Lessig's book Code, where he talks about the 4 ways society can be controlled, and he lists architecture, law, market, and norms. And of those 4, the most powerful are norms. And architecture plays a huge part in how the norms unfold. And so to me, why I'm here, why I'm involved with our chain is really, I'm curious about how, after the platform, after this foundation is built, how the architecture is going to work, so that we can create the norms that lead to a collective intelligence rather than collective stupidity of the current social network models that dominate our economic structure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the most interesting things is if you look at the heart of the R-chain solution is the road calculus. And the reason I mention it here in this context is because the mobile process calculi have an astonishing characteristic and something that shows something about human cognition. It wasn't until the late 1980s, early 1990s, think about this, that we had a mathematical model of agency that included autonomy.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yes. So if you look at the lambda calculus, which was the sort of next of kin to the pi calculus and the mobile process calculi, that model of computation, there must always be an uber arching agent. There must be something on top. There needs to be a controlling agent. If you look at the traditional classical mathematics, you're looking at analysis of dynamics that starts with a God's eye view. There's an agent that can see the whole system. If you look at even situations like Petri nets, where you do have concurrency, again, you have to have an entire system-wide view. You can't. There isn't a notion of autonomy, so agents that can come together and disband and come together and disband that are acting independently of each other and yet still coordinating. And what that shows is that even though we've had Aristotelian logic for thousands of years, we've had geometry for thousands of years, so we've had the capacity for this kind of abstract thinking or modeling of dynamics and agency, and yet there's been no model of autonomous agency for thousands and thousands of years.
So you're saying that this model has only been around since the 80s?
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
So what it says is that there's a hole in human thinking when human beings think about agents that get stuff done, whether it's they get computations done or they get stuff done in terms of law or decisions. They have modeled those systems in terms of their own inner picture of the world, which means that the inner picture has this notion of someone is always on top. There's always someone who has sort of the global view, and that's just not how things actually work. There's no king tree.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So it says something, and it's there's a conceptual social radical revolution sitting inside of RChain, which is the model of computation itself. I've been trying to push this as a model of computation, which is more efficient, yada yada yada, for decades. And part of the uphill battle here is that most people walk around, just like all the scientists and mathematicians and logicians and type theorists who modeled these kinds of things for thousands of years, literally. They walk around with a map of the world in their head that doesn't include autonomy. That doesn't include the possibility of egalitarian or agents that work side by side with no one in charge. The idea that there's no one in charge, is terrifying to humanity.
Okay, I think I'm starting to finally grasp a little bit of what you're saying. I still have trouble figuring out how to understand autonomy in the context of what you're talking about.
I think he's just saying that for the first time in human history, we have an ability to coordinate.
Well, we have a mathematical model of what it means to have agents that cooperate together, collaborate together, and get stuff done, but
Okay.
no one's in charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea of nobody's in charge is terrifically radical. It's so radical that for thousands of years there hasn't been a single mathematical or scientific model that embodies that in a way that you can do calculations until the 1980s.
Huh.
That's how revolutionary this is. And this, I believe, is at the heart of the shift that we have to make as a species.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no king slime mold cell in charge. The slime mold coordinates. There's no king firefly that's in charge. The fireflies flash in synchrony through cooperation, collaboration. And this is how nature scales. Nobody's in charge.
Like the school of fish thing?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And it's terrifying, right? And I hate to go here, but this, you can kind of see how Western culture, especially monotheism, right, has a part of it, this idea of a need for there to be this overarching intelligence. And I'm not criticizing monotheistic religions. I'm just saying, if you look at it from a psychological perspective, right, that's what that corroborates the evidence that we get from the scientific disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it reminds me, I don't know if any of you have seen Thor, the Marvel movie Thor. Well, there's a few actually. But there's one, and the villain Loki, who is his brother, supposedly his adopted brother. He goes to Earth and he does some magical stuff, and he forces them all to like bow down to him. And he's like, is this not easier? Isn't this all what you want? You want to be ruled. Just admit it. This is all what you want. And I think maybe when they wrote that comic, that's what they were thinking, you know, is that there's evidence that human beings like to be ruled. They like to be controlled. You know what I mean? And of course they break out of that and then there's a happy ending. But I mean, it was that just what you said just there reminded me of that point in that movie that he said, you know, isn't there a piece of you that wants to be dominated? You don't want to work together. You just want to be told what to do, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. And that attitude is what I'm suggesting is absolutely necessary. We must accept our own agency and work together, recognizing that everyone is going to be independent and operating, you know, independently. And it's going to require the ability to coordinate in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why Greta Thunberg is so, like, you know, radical. And what she did is because she, and when she met Barack Obama, you know, they made that little video, which I sent you, Greg, and she said, you know, you're never too small to make a difference, and don't be afraid to be creative in whatever way that you want to, you know, help change the world. And I know that sounds really cliche, you know, you're never too small and be creative, but actually it's like a really deep thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it really aligns with what you just said, to accept your agency.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I think that's what she was also saying in her own way. You know.
Yeah, it's a different. You know, I think a lot of people, when they talk about acceptance, they think of acceptance as a more passive thing. But here, acceptance is really, it's very active. You have to accept the mantle of responsibility. We're the only ones that we can count on to address the issues of climate change, and the evidence is entirely on the side of that assessment. Right, for decades and decades, people have known about the situation, and you know what has been done. So we're the only ones that are going to be able to you know, accept the responsibility. And then, you know, we find each other. For example, as the people in the R chain community have found each other. We find each other, and then we begin to build up these trust relationships with each other. So and part of that means that, you know, we stay together through thick and thin. We listen to each other, and this is kind of what I was talking about before. There's a set of coordination technologies that live above or underneath or around or through all of the sort of hardware and software bits. Right? There are social coordination technologies. You know, whether you're talking consent to majority rules, or you're talking consent to a monarchy, or you're talking to consent to Robert's Rules of Order. People consent to participate in certain social technologies and we're going to have to explore a wider range of those than the ones we've got, because the ones we've got haven't been as helpful in harnessing that agency we were just talking about. They're not so well suited to harnessing that agency to the point where, you know, where we can yoke it to get solutions for the climate change situation.